I sat stiffly on a metal bench outside Walter Reed Military Medical Center, my palms pressed so tightly together that my fingers ached. The early spring breeze carried the sharp tang of cherry blossoms from the parade grounds, and sunlight glanced off the hospital's polished windows. None of it touched me. Behind those walls, my father, Colonel Robert Hayes, a decorated Army officer with 3 decades of service, was in the ICU, locked in a fight against an enemy we never even saw coming. Soldiers and families drifted past, talking in low voices about weekend barbecues or upcoming drills, and for a fleeting moment I wished I could trade places with them. To just be another daughter enjoying a warm afternoon, debating dinner plans, not carrying the weight of a war I couldn't fight with weapons or strategy. But I wasn't that daughter anymore. My world had shrunk to the sterile hum of machines and the harsh rhythm of ventilators. My father had always been unshakable. The kind of man who could endure 20-hour days in the field, then still sit across from me and ask about my classes, my training, my future. His presence was iron, steady and immovable, the kind of strength I thought would last forever. Now watching him weaken, it felt like the ground beneath me had turned to shifting sand. Just half a year ago we believed we had decades. We talked about where he'd retire, about taking a trip together to Normandy where his own father had once fought, about the family legacy I was determined to carry on. But then one evening he came home pale and drained, brushing it off as another grueling day at the Pentagon. The exhaustion didn't fade. It worsened, dark bruises, shallow breaths, nights where his chest rattled with every inhale. And then came the words from the doctors, cold and foreign, words I refused to believe belonged to him. Aplastic anemia. That was the diagnosis. His own body was dismantling his bone marrow, shutting down the very source of his blood. Without a stem cell transplant, the doctors warned, hope would fade fast. I tried to hold steady for him, squeezing his hand, telling him we'd push through this like every other fight. But at night, alone in the bathroom, my strength cracked. I buried my sobs into a towel so no one would hear. Because I carried a truth my father didn't. Colonel Hayes had no siblings left, no living relatives close enough to test. His parents had passed decades ago, and his only brother was buried with honors in Arlington. With no immediate family, the odds of finding a compatible donor in time were terrifyingly slim. We signed him up for the National Registry, but the doctors were blunt. The wait could stretch into months, even years. My father didn't have that luxury. Earlier today his physician pulled me aside, his voice heavy. "Captain Lewis, we're running out of options. If we can't secure a donor soon." He stopped short, but he didn't need to finish. I knew what he meant. I stood there with tears streaking my face, feeling powerless. I'd spent my life patching wounds, stabilizing soldiers, keeping people alive under fire. But here I was, unable to save the man who had built my world, the man who had taught me discipline and honor. My mind drifted back to the life we'd shared off duty. The cedar cabin he'd built with his own hands after retiring from active command, the battered leather chair where he read his service journals every evening, the framed note above the door he had written to me when I graduated Ranger School. "You are forged for more." The thought of losing him hollowed me out. And still, in the quietest corners of my mind, a voice whispered I might need to prepare for that reality. I despised myself for even thinking it, but grief had already begun to curl icy fingers around my heart. And then, as if fate wasn't cruel enough, I overheard something. A conversation that shifted everything I thought I knew. I remembered the night my life with him as my mentor and anchor crystallized. It wasn't in a hospital or in the middle of a crisis. It was long before. Back when I was still a cadet, barely finished with exams at West Point. Exhausted but free, I let my squad mates drag me into a cramped cafe in D.C. near the academy grounds. The air smelled of roasted coffee and old wood. That's when my father walked in straight from the motor pool, uniform sleeves rolled, boots dusty, carrying a bag of tools. He carried himself with that calm weight of confidence, the kind that makes heads turn. I'll never forget it, how he smiled faintly when our eyes met across the room, how he sat down across from me and instead of lecturing simply asked if the seat was taken. We talked for hours that evening, about everything and nothing at all. He told me about the satisfaction he found working with his hands, restoring old carburetors and carving wood in the garage. I shared my dream of becoming a field surgeon one day, of following him into the army but forging my own path. We laughed about how we both despised spinach but could never resist blackberry pie. And when he laughed, really laughed, His eyes crinkled at the corners in a way that made me feel safe, like I belonged to something larger than myself. From that night forward, my father became more than just a commanding presence in uniform. He was my anchor. He showed up for me in ways that seemed small but meant everything. A compass he picked up at a surplus store because I'd once said I liked navigation drills. A field journal wrapped in plain paper, wildflowers tied together from the edges of the base. He had a gift for making ordinary moments feel extraordinary. 2 years later, when I pinned on my captain's bars, he stood in front of me beneath the canopy of an old oak on the parade ground, eyes shining with pride. He was never a man who hid his emotions. He believed strength wasn't in silence but in showing love. Without hesitation or apology, that we settled into a modest cedar house near the installation. It was a fixer-upper my father insisted he could handle himself, and he did. Weekends were spent sanding boards, repairing the porch, even building a rocking chair as a gift when I returned from my first deployment. That chair still sits on the porch today, a silent witness to countless evenings where we sat side by side, watching the horizon fade into dusk. Life felt full, though far from perfect. The one thing missing was the future he longed to see me have. A family of my own. I tried. After marriage, my body refused to cooperate. Months bled into years, filled with sterile clinics, hormone shots, and failed IVF cycles. Each negative test hollowed me out, making me feel broken, like I had failed him and myself. But he never once turned that disappointment against me. On nights when I collapsed into his arms, apologizing through tears, saying, "You deserve more than this," he would tilt my chin up, meeting my eyes, and tell me, "Anna, I didn't raise you to be defined by children. You are enough. You are my family." That was my father, unyielding in his kindness, unwavering in his love. He could have been angry, bitter, distant. Instead, he chose compassion every time. Looking back, I see now how those years of quiet battles prepared us for what was still to come. The nights when the only thing that carried us forward was the strength of holding on to each other. The future we had reshaped together became our blueprint for endurance, the map we leaned on when the storm finally broke. Because when my father fell ill, the foundation of my world caved in. And yet, even pale and weakened in a hospital bed, he still tried to be the unshakable one. He cracked jokes about the bland meals, teased me for hovering over him like a drill sergeant, and promised we'd push through just as we always had. But beneath the surface, I knew this was different. This wasn't another obstacle. This was life or death. And I wasn't ready to imagine the army, the house, or my own future without him. It began so quietly we barely noticed. He would come home from the Pentagon earlier than usual, brushing it off with a wry grin. "Just a long day, Anna. Nothing more." But the fatigue never lifted. It grew heavier, like something unseen was anchoring him down more each week. Then the bruises appeared. Small at first, easy to dismiss, until they multiplied, purple patches blooming without cause across his arms and legs. One night, I woke to the sound of him gasping for air, clutching his chest like his lungs had betrayed him. The soldier in me, the medic in me, knew immediately this wasn't simple exhaustion. I begged him to see a doctor. When he finally agreed, I convinced myself it would be something minor. A vitamin deficiency, maybe stress. Instead, we were ushered into a hematology office, where specialists ran test after test. I'll never forget when the results came back. The doctor sat us down, his voice too steady, his eyes too grave. "Colonel Hayes, you have aplastic anemia. It's rare, and in your case it's severe. Your bone marrow is shutting down." It felt like the air had been ripped from my chest. My father, ever calm, simply nodded and asked, "What's the next step?" The answer was brutally simple, and impossibly hard. He would need a bone marrow transplant. Without it, his body could no longer make the cells to keep him alive. But for that, a sibling or close relative was the ideal match. I looked at him, silently pleading for some name, some relative I didn't know about. But I already knew the truth. His only brother was gone. His parents had been buried decades ago. My father had no family tree left to lean on. We joined the National Donor Registry immediately, but the doctors were blunt. Finding a stranger match could take months. Months he didn't have. The disease was merciless. His skin grew pale, his once steady hands trembling when he tried to lift a glass. The same man who once led soldiers through all-night missions now struggled to cross the living room. Even then, he tried to protect me. He joked about the oversized hospital gowns, about how maybe baldness would finally make him look distinguished. But at night, when he thought I was asleep, I could hear him whispering prayers under his breath. He wasn't asking for his own strength. He was asking for mine. I'd sit by his bed, gripping his hand, forcing a brave smile as I said, "We're going to beat this." But inside, fear coiled tight in my chest. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if even he could win this battle. I was terrified of losing him. Terrified of walking into the house and finding it silent, empty. Terrified of a future I had never prepared myself to face. One afternoon, after yet another transfusion, the attending physician pulled me aside. His tone was calm but heavy with finality. "Captain Lewis, we're running out of options. If a donor isn't found soon, I'm afraid the colonel doesn't have much time." I could only nod, my throat tight, the sting of tears burning in my eyes. I had seen death before. Combat doesn't spare you from that, but nothing could brace me for the thought of losing my father. I stumbled out into the courtyard, desperate for air, for anything that might ground me. That's when I overheard it. 2 hospital staff on break, speaking casually, unaware of my presence. "You know that officer in ICU, Hayes? He looks exactly like a man who lives out in Iron Ridge. It's uncanny, like looking at the same person." My heart seized. Iron Ridge, a small mountain town only a few hours away. Was it coincidence? Or could it mean there was family hidden and unknown who might be a match? For the first time in weeks, something flickered inside me, something I had nearly forgotten. Hope. Fragile, trembling, but alive. Their words echoed in my head. "He looks exactly like that man in Iron Ridge." Iron Ridge. I had only been there once years ago, during a cadet community outreach trip. A quiet place where life moved slower, where strangers still waved at passing cars. Could it truly be nothing more than resemblance? Perhaps. But deep inside I knew it was more. My father had grown up without a map to his own bloodline. His parents died when he was young, and he had spent his life with little more than stories and medals to tie him to the past. I remembered nights when he admitted how often he wondered if there was anyone out there who shared his eyes, his steady jaw, the same quiet strength. Once, sitting on the porch at sunset, he confessed, "Sometimes I think about searching for family. But what if they didn't want me then? Why would they want me now?" There had been such raw ache in his voice, and I never knew how to answer. So he buried the thought, building his life around service and around me. To him, family was something you created through loyalty, not blood. But now blood wasn't just an idea. It wasn't sentiment. It was survival. And it might mean the difference between life and death. That night, sleep never came. I sat by my father's bedside, his hand in mine, while the machines filled the silence with their steady hum. His skin had turned ashen, his breathing shallow but even. Leaning close, I whispered, "I'm going to fix this, Dad. Whatever it takes, I'll find a way." By morning I had made my decision. I walked into headquarters, straight-backed, and filed for emergency leave. My commander didn't press me with questions. She already knew the colonel's condition. She just clasped my shoulder, signed the form, and wished me strength. I threw a bag together, my pulse hammering with dread and determination. I didn't even know the man's name, only that he lived in Iron Ridge and, according to rumor, bore an uncanny resemblance to my father. I had no concrete plan. Just a photograph of him on my phone and the fragile thread of hope pulling me forward. Before I left, I stopped by his hospital room. He was awake, and when he saw me, the faintest smile tugged at his lips. "You look like you're gearing up for battle," he teased, his voice weak but warm. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "Maybe I am." He started to ask questions, but I shook my head. "Don't worry about it. Just rest. I'll be back before you know it." I wanted to tell him about Iron Ridge, about the possibility of family and a donor, but I couldn't risk offering him hope if it ended in nothing. The drive out of D.C. felt unreal. The interstate gave way to winding country roads, then to stretches of farmland dotted with early spring blossoms. Finally, the rolling hills of Iron Ridge came into view. As I crossed a weathered wooden bridge into town, I breathed a silent prayer. Please let this be real. Please let there be someone out there who can save him. I parked near a small general store, phone clenched tight in my hand. Life here moved slower. Farmers hoisting sacks of feed, children pedaling bikes down dusty lanes, an old man sweeping his porch. Every face I passed, I studied carefully, searching for a reflection of my father's strong jawline, his steady eyes. Inside the store, I approached the clerk, a man with graying hair and tired but kind eyes. "Excuse me," I began. "I'm looking for someone." I don't know his name, but people say he looks like this. I showed him the photo of my father. His eyes widened instantly. You must mean Jacob Mercer. Lives out near the cornfields on County Road 9. And yes, he does look a lot like this. My heart stuttered. Could you give me directions? He nodded and sketched them out quickly. I thanked him and stepped back into the misty air, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. The road toward County Road 9 was little more than cracked asphalt winding through pine groves and open fields. Rain began to drift down in a fine mist, blurring the horizon into a watercolor haze. I slowed when I finally spotted the weathered mailbox at the edge of the drive, the faded white letters spelling it out. Mercer. The house behind the mailbox was worn with age, its paint peeling in strips, surrounded by a field of corn stubble and rutted tire tracks. A rusted swing groaned as the wind pushed it back and forth, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked into the gray air. For a long moment I stayed in the car, gripping the wheel, pulse hammering in my ears. What if I was wrong? What if this was nothing but coincidence, and I was about to humiliate myself in front of a stranger? But then I pictured my father's frail hand gripping mine in the hospital, the way he tried to smile to mask the fear in his eyes. That image pushed me out of the car. The wooden steps groaned under my boots as I climbed them. I knocked lightly at first, then harder when no answer came. At last the door opened with a creak. A man stood there, taller than I had expected, broad-shouldered though slightly stooped, his sandy hair falling loosely across his forehead. And then his eyes, my breath caught. They were the same steel-gray eyes as my father's, the same shape, the same piercing weight. He studied me, guarded. "Can I help you?" His voice was deep, cautious, with the rasp of someone unaccustomed to visitors. My hands shook as I held out my phone, showing him a photo of my father in uniform. "This is my dad. Colonel Robert Hayes. People told me, you look just like him." The man frowned, staring at the screen for what felt like forever. His expression shifted, confusion, disbelief, then something raw and painful. He rubbed the back of his neck, murmuring, "Well, I'll be damned." He looked at me again, his tone softer. "Who are you?" "Anna Hayes. I'm his daughter." He stepped back, pulling the door wider. "You'd better come inside." The house was simple, with scuffed wood floors, mismatched furniture, and the faint smell of coffee mingled with motor oil. He motioned toward a chair. "Sit down. You're saying this man is your father?" I nodded, clutching my bag in my lap. "He's in the hospital. He's very sick. The doctors say he needs a bone marrow transplant. They told us he had no living family, but then I heard about you and I had to come." My voice cracked at the edges. The man, Jacob Mercer as he introduced himself, sat across from me, elbows braced on his knees. He stared at the picture again, shaking his head slowly. "I think he might be my brother." The words hit me so hard I forgot how to breathe. "Your brother?" Jacob nodded. "Our mother. She wasn't much of one, truth be told. She had a lot of kids, most with different fathers. When I was little she had another baby. A boy. I remember her saying she wasn't keeping him. She signed the papers at the hospital and left him there. I was just a kid, too young to do anything, but I never forgot. Always wondered where he ended up." Jacob dragged both hands across his face, his voice unsteady. "I didn't even know his name until now." My vision blurred with tears. My father has spent his whole life believing he was completely alone. He never stopped wondering if there was family out there. Jacob's jaw tightened. He pushed himself up from the chair, eyes set with a kind of resolve that sent a chill through me. "I'll do it. The transplant. I don't even need to think about it." I stared at him. You'd really?" "He's my brother," Jacob cut in, voice firm. "If there's a chance I can keep him alive, of course I will." He disappeared into the kitchen, came back with his truck keys and asked simply, "When do we leave?" For a second I was frozen. I had braced myself for arguments, for pleading, maybe even rejection. But there was none of that. It was as though he had been waiting for this moment his entire life without realizing it. That evening we left Iron Ridge, rain sheeting across the windshield, Jacob's old pickup rumbling behind me on the highway. My chest felt lighter than it had in months. Fear still lingered, it always did, but for the first time I felt something solid beneath it. Hope. At Walter Reed, I guided Jacob through the sterile corridors to my father's room. The colonel was awake, propped against his pillows, his face pale but his eyes instantly brightening when he saw me. Then they shifted to Jacob and narrowed in disbelief. For a long moment, silence filled the room. My father's mouth parted slightly as though he were looking at a ghost. Jacob stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. I think I'm your brother." Tears welled in my father's eyes. "My brother." I stood rooted in place as the two men, strangers until a day ago, bound by blood, locked eyes as though recognizing something wordless, something only they could feel. My father extended a trembling hand. Jacob gripped it firmly. "We'll talk later," Jacob said softly. "But right now, I'm here to save your life." The hospital moved quickly. My father's condition was worsening, so the doctors rushed the testing process. When the hematologist entered the waiting room later, her relieved smile nearly buckled my knees. "He's a strong match," she said. "One of the best we've seen in years." I turned to Jacob, tears spilling freely. "Did you hear that? You can save him." His expression shifted between shock and determination. Then he nodded once. "Then let's do it. When do we start?" That night, the two brothers finally had a chance to speak. I lingered just outside the doorway, giving them space, but I could still hear their voices. Low at first, hesitant, then slowly warmer. My father's voice cracked as he said, "I used to dream about having a brother. I thought it was foolish, like wishing for a home you'd never have. But now you're here. Real." Jacob gave a quiet laugh, though his words trembled. "Guess life had other plans." He paused, then added softly, "I'm sorry I wasn't there, Rob. I didn't even know." "You don't have to be sorry," my father murmured, gripping Jacob's hand with a surprising strength for someone so frail. "You're here now. That's all that matters." When I stepped back into the room, his eyes shimmered with tears. "Anna," he whispered, voice cracking, "I have a brother. I'm not alone." I kissed his forehead gently and whispered back, "You never were." The transplant was scheduled for the next morning. I barely slept that night, my mind racing through every possible outcome, clinging to the fragile thread of hope that tomorrow might finally bring relief. Jacob was calm as dawn broke, even joking with the nurses while they prepped him. "Never thought I'd be giving my bone marrow to a man I met yesterday," he teased, then glanced toward my father and added more softly, "But I'm glad it's him." The hours dragged, but eventually it was done. The procedure went smoothly, and my father was moved into recovery as Jacob's stem cells began their quiet, life-saving work. I sat at his bedside, holding his hand, feeling warmth creeping back into his skin. For the first time in months, there was color in his cheeks. Later, Jacob slipped into the room looking exhausted but proud. My father reached out, clasping his brother's arm weakly. "You just gave me a second chance," he whispered. Jacob smiled faintly. "Guess we're even. You gave me family." This time I didn't fight the tears. For so many months, I had carried nothing but fear and loneliness, but here, between two men who had found each other against all odds, I felt something I hadn't dared to in so long. Peace. Outside the window, the city lights of DC glimmered against the evening sky, and I thought about how swiftly life could pivot, from despair to hope, from loss to restoration, in just a handful of days. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe deeply and believe. My father might actually survive, and in the process, we had been given a gift far greater than we had asked for. The days after the transplant felt like stepping into new territory, where hope finally outweighed fear. Each morning, I watched for the smallest victories. A touch more color in his face, a steadier voice, a firmer squeeze when he held my hand. Jacob stayed close, sleeping in a battered pull-out chair when hospital rules forced him from the room at night. He never once complained. One evening, I brought him a coffee and found him staring quietly through the glass, all etched across his face. "He's really my brother," he said softly, as though still trying to convince himself. Slowly my father grew stronger. On a crisp autumn afternoon, he stepped outside for the first time since the transplant. I walked beside him as he shuffled carefully along the hospital garden path, sunlight falling through golden leaves. "I forgot how good fresh air feels," he whispered, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. A week later, the doctors cleared him to go home. We left the hospital and returned together to our little cedar house, where the porch chair he once built still waited, creaking softly in the evening breeze. This time Jacob followed behind us in his battered pickup, no longer just a stranger but a permanent part of our lives. When we pulled into the driveway, the house felt different. Fuller, as if it had been waiting all these years for this reunion to make it whole again. In the weeks that followed, Jacob became a fixture of our days. He and my father would sit on the porch for hours, trading fragments of memory. My father spoke of foster homes and the loneliness that had defined so much of his youth, while Jacob filled in the missing pieces. Stories about their mother, tales of half-siblings scattered across the years, details my father had never known. One evening, Jacob pulled a small, worn pocketknife from his pocket, the initials of their father etched into the handle. "It's all I have left of him," he said softly. "But I want you to have it." My father held it in trembling hands, tears sliding down his weathered cheeks as he closed his fingers around the gift. Word spread quickly through Iron Ridge. Cards and casseroles arrived, prayers scribbled on folded paper from people I had never met. "Family is everything. Hold on to each other," one note read. And somehow the kindness of strangers stitched something back together inside me. It was proof that goodness survived even in life's harshest seasons. Months passed. My father grew stronger. His color returned, his laugh filled the rooms again, and though he worked slower than before, he found his way back into the garage, sanding wood, building piece by piece. One evening he called me outside to the porch where a brand new rocking chair waited, crafted with patient precision. "This one's for you," he said simply. I sat down, tears blurring my sight as the chair rocked gently beneath me, its creak familiar, its meaning immeasurable. We folded Jacob into our traditions. Sunday dinners became sacred, filled with stories, laughter, and a gratitude that lingered quietly between us. Sometimes I caught the two of them exchanging those half-smiles, like they still couldn't believe they had found each other after all these years. One golden autumn evening, my father and I walked slowly down a tree-lined road near Iron Ridge, his arm hooked through mine. Ahead of us, Jacob carried his best friend's daughter on his shoulders, her laughter ringing out as the leaves swirled around them. My father squeezed my hand. "You know," he murmured, "I used to think being abandoned meant I'd always be alone. I was wrong. Have you? And now I have him too." I looked at him, the truth of it settling deep in my chest. "Family isn't always about blood," I whispered. "But sometimes it is, and that's beautiful." That night, we gathered around a small bonfire in Jacob's backyard. Flames flickered across familiar faces, laughter blending with the crackle of burning wood. I leaned my head against my father's shoulder, listening to Jacob recount stories of streets and playgrounds my father barely remembered. And for the first time in years I felt it, that quiet certainty that we were going to be okay.